Welcome to the Source Studios, where we explore the hidden mechanics of the mind. Today, we're unpacking a massive paradox about your brain. The exact same biological system that allows you to change your life is also fiercely designed to stop you from doing it.
Yeah, it really is the ultimate evolutionary catch-22.
It is. And, think about the last time you set an alarm to wake up an hour earlier to write, or you finally committed to that new workout routine.
Oh,
You hit that almost physical wall on day 3, right? Well, that isn't a lack of willpower.
Yeah.
It is a highly sophisticated biological defense mechanism.
exactly. I mean, we live in this era where we're constantly told we can just, completely reinvent ourselves.
Totally.
But then our own neural wiring acts like, a literal brick wall the very moment we attempt to deviate from our established routines.
And that is our mission for this deep dive. We are talking directly to you, the listener. We want to explore why trying to change feels so incredibly hard.
Yeah.
And more importantly, we want to dismantle the guilt associated with that failure.
Which is so common,
It
honestly.
really is. Okay, let's unpack this. We're looking at a source text called The Biological Architecture of Resistance and Change.
Right.
And it fundamentally shifts the blame from a moral failing or a lack of discipline to a strictly mechanical process.
And that shift in perspective is just, it's crucial. I mean, this source material takes all that popular self-help rhetoric we hear every day.
Yeah, the motivational speeches, the productivity hacks.
Exactly. It takes all of that and runs it through the cold, hard filter of neuroscience.
Right.
We are going to examine how your brain is engineered to conserve metabolic energy, how it constantly predicts reality to keep you safe, and, well, why it treats your sudden desire to be a highly productive, early rising person as a literal physiological threat.
The threat to its survival, that's wild. So the text starts by tackling what it calls the plasticity paradox.
Yeah, which is fascinating.
Because everywhere you look, neuroplasticity is the ultimate buzzword, right? It's on magazine covers, it's the centerpiece of corporate seminars. The prevailing narrative is that your brain is like clay, infinitely moldable, and you can just rewire your mind to be whoever you want to be.
And to be fair, the foundational science behind that buzzword is entirely accurate. Neuroplasticity is a documented biological reality.
Right, the brain does change.
It does. Your brain physically reshapes itself based on your repeated behaviors and experiences. The synaptic connections between your neurons strengthen or weaken, depending on how often they are used.
But there's a catch.
A huge catch. The pop psychology narrative completely misses the second half of that biological equation.
Which is what?
The brain doesn't just learn patterns to become more efficient. It actively, aggressively defends those patterns once they are established.
Okay, I need to push back on that because on the surface, that sounds like a total contradiction.
Sure, yeah, it does.
If my brain is supposedly this incredibly adaptable organ, so plastic and eager to reshape itself to optimize my life, why does it fight me in the trenches when I try to implement a change that is undeniably good for my health?
Right.
Like, say I decide to stop the habit of immediately checking my phone the second I open my eyes in the morning.
A very common one.
Logically, my prefrontal cortex knows that's a brilliant move for my mental health, but my brain throws an absolute tantrum on day 2.
Yeah.
Why defend a habit that is making me miserable?
What's fascinating here is that the brain is entirely value neutral when it comes to your modern abstract goals.
Value neutral.
Yes, it does not care about your career trajectory or your New Year's resolutions. The same system that allows you to adapt to a new environment is fundamentally engineered to lock in those adaptations once they prove they won't kill you.
Oh, wow.
Think about this from the perspective of evolutionary biology. If your brain randomly generated a behavior yesterday and you woke up alive today, the brain stamps that behavior as a successful survival strategy.
And it wants to protect that strategy at all costs.
Exactly.
So to my brain, my morning doom scrolling habit isn't a bad habit. It's just a pattern that successfully bridged the gap between yesterday and today without me getting eaten by a predator.
Precisely. The brain only distinguishes between an established behavior and a novel behavior, and novelty implies risk.
That makes so much sense.
Right. So when you suddenly decide to ignore your phone and meditate instead, the resistance you feel isn't psychological hesitation. It is a hardwired defense mechanism.
It's fighting back.
Yes, your nervous system is effectively saying, hey, this phone checking protocol has kept us alive and stable for 3 years.
Yeah.
Why are we introducing an unverified, potentially dangerous variable into the morning routine.
That really reframes the entire struggle. It isn't self-sabotage, it's just an overzealous security system.
Exactly.
But if the brain is defending these patterns so aggressively, it must be protecting something incredibly valuable. What is the currency the brain is trying so desperately to hoard?
Metabolic energy.
Energy, okay.
Yes. And to understand this, we have to look at the sheer biological cost of operating a human brain. The source text provides some staggering numbers that put this into perspective.
Let's hear them.
So, the human brain makes up only about 2% of your total body weight. It's a relatively small organ.
Right.
Yet, it consumes roughly 20% of your body's total energy expenditure every single day. Just resting.
Wait, really? 20% of my daily calories are going to a 3-pound mass of fat and water inside my skull.
Yeah, it is a massive metabolic overhead.
That is wild.
It's an astronomical drain. To put it in physiological terms, your brain is constantly pumping sodium and potassium ions across neuronal membranes just to maintain a resting electrical charge.
So it's always on standby.
Right, so that it's ready to fire an action potential if needed. That pumping process alone burns a massive amount of glucose.
Wow.
And evolution, which is essentially a ruthless accountant, despises waste. For hundreds of thousands of years, food was scarce. Caloric energy was hard to come by.
So the brain had to adapt.
Yes. Because the brain is so incredibly expensive to run, it had to evolve a fail-safe strategy to prevent you from literally starving to death just from thinking too hard.
And that fail-safe strategy is automation, right? Turn off the conscious thought process wherever possible.
Exactly. Automate absolutely everything. If a behavior can be offloaded from the energy-hungry conscious mind and turned into a blind automatic reflex, the brain will do it.
Let's ground this in everyday life, because the mechanics of this automation are wild when you actually observe them in yourself.
Oh, totally.
Think about driving a car. The very first time you sat behind the steering wheel as a teenager, the sensory overload was paralyzing.
Right, because every single action required conscious processing in the prefrontal cortex.
Yes, you were calculating the spatial relationship between your car and the curb, estimating the pressure needed on the brake pedal.
Monitoring the mirrors, trying to predict the physics of a moving vehicle.
Exactly.
And the prefrontal cortex is the most advanced part of our brain, but it is also the most metabolically expensive. It burns through glucose at a terrifying rate when learning a novel task.
Which is why you literally have to turn the radio down just to look for a parking spot. Because your brain doesn't have the bandwidth to process an auditory signal while running a complex visual spatial calculation.
Exactly. But contrast that with a decade later.
Oh, it's entirely different. You can drive 30 minutes to work in heavy traffic, mentally draft an email to your boss, listen to a complex deep dive.
Right.
And when you pull into the parking lot, you don't even consciously remember the commute. You are functionally unconscious for the drive.
And that unconscious state is the brain's masterpiece of energy conservation.
What's actually happening there?
What happens biologically is called chunking. As you repeat the complex sequence of driving, your brain takes that sequence out of the expensive prefrontal cortex and physically shifts the processing down into a much older, deeper structure.
Okay.
It's vastly more energy efficient, and it's called the basal ganglia. It operates kind of like a biological hard drive. It stores the sequence of actions as a single compressed file.
So the behavior goes from being 100 individual conscious decisions like check mirror, apply brake, turn wheel, to a single automated macro.
Yes, exactly.
You know, I'm imagining a smartphone that is constantly trying to force itself into low power mode.
Well, that's a great way to look at it.
Right. Like when you are learning something new, it's like having the screen brightness at 100%, playing a 4K video with the flashlight on, and location services tracking you.
Yeah, the battery is just draining in real time.
Exactly. But a habit stored in the basal ganglia, that's a background app. It runs quietly behind the scenes, managing your commute or your typing, using almost zero battery.
That is a highly accurate way to visualize the metabolic shift. Your brain is terrified of the battery dying because, historically, a dead battery meant death.
Right.
Conscious, deliberate action is a luxury the brain only wants to afford when absolutely necessary. Therefore, its primary directive is to turn your daily life into a series of low-power background apps.
It makes so much sense.
It is trying to put you on autopilot so it can conserve its precious glucose reserves for a genuine, life-threatening emergency.
Which explains why we are such creatures of habit. It's not a lack of adventurous spirit, it's a metabolic mandate. Precisely.
But if we are physically shifting behaviors from the prefrontal cortex to the basal ganglia, there must be a structural change happening inside the brain to accommodate that, right? How does the brain actually build these background apps?
This is where we get into the physical architecture of neuroplasticity, specifically the process of myelination.
Okay.
The source text uses a visual metaphor of walking through a field of tall grass to explain habit formation. But let's connect that metaphor directly to the biology.
Let's do it.
Inside your brain, you have roughly 86 billion neurons communicating through electrical signals. The fundamental rule of neuroscience, famously coined by Donald Hebb, is neurons that fire together, wire together.
Right, so if I take a specific action, a specific network of neurons fires a sequence of electrical impulses.
Correct. And the first time you execute a new behavior, say sitting down at your desk to do cognitively demanding deep work instead of turning on the television.
Always a struggle, always. Well, that first time, it is like stepping into a wild, untamed field of 10-foot-tall grass. You are hacking your way through.
It's slow and exhausting.
It is. And the electrical signal in your brain is literally traveling slowly because the pathway is unrefined.
And the grass just springs right back up behind me. Nothing is permanently altered by that first attempt.
Exactly. But if you force yourself to walk that exact same path the next day and the day after that, your brain notices the repetition.
And how does it respond?
It responds to repetition by deploying specialized cells called oligodendrocytes. These cells wrap the axon, which is the long cable of the neuron that carries the electrical signal, in a fatty insulating substance called myelin.
Okay, so the myelin is the biological equivalent of trampling down the grass to create a dirt path.
It is much more dramatic than just a dirt path. Myelin acts like rubber insulation on a copper electrical wire. It prevents the electrical signal from leaking out, which allows the signal to travel incredibly fast.
How fast are we talking?
Well, an unmyelinated electrical signal in the brain might travel at a speed of about 2 meters per second. A heavily myelinated signal can travel at up to 120 meters per second.
Wow, that is a staggering difference. It goes from a slow walk to a high-speed rail line.
That is exactly what happens. Over years of repeating a habit, that path through the grass isn't just cleared. It becomes a paved, multi-lane, frictionless highway.
Okay, let's apply the biology of myelination to a frustrating, everyday reality like procrastinating.
Oh, a perfect example.
You have a massive, complex project due. You're sitting in your living room. The sequence of behaviors required to walk to the couch, grab the remote, and turn on a streaming service is a heavily myelinated, 120 meter per second, perfectly paved superhighway.
Oh yeah. The electrical signal encounters zero resistance.
Exactly.
The basal ganglia can execute that entire sequence flawlessly before your conscious mind even realizes what is happening.
But the path to walk to the desk, open the laptop, and engage in difficult problem solving, that pathway has almost no myelin. The grass is 10 feet high.
Right.
The electrical signal is crawling at 2 meters per second, leaking energy the entire way.
And your brain, acting as the ultimate meta-click accountant, looks at the energy required to force a signal down the unmyelinated path, looks at the frictionless superhighway leading to the couch, and aggressively pushes you toward the couch.
It isn't trying to ruin your career.
No, not at all. It is looking at the physics of the neural circuitry and choosing the path of least resistance to save energy.
So when I wake up and decide today is the day I stop procrastinating, and I feel that intense physical drag pulling me toward the television, that isn't me being a lazy failure. That is the physical reality of an unmyelinated neural circuit competing against a myelinated one.
It is literal structural resistance.
Yeah.
But energy conservation and myelination only explain part of the puzzle.
There's more.
Oh, definitely. If saving energy was the brain's only goal, we would just sleep all day. To truly understand why we repeat behaviors, especially toxic or destructive behaviors, we have to look at the brain's relationship with time.
Okay, where does the text take us with this?
It brings us to a concept that completely changed how I view human behavior: the brain as a prediction machine.
I want to spend a lot of time on this because the source material calls this one of the most profound paradigm shifts in modern neuroscience.
It really is.
The concept of predictive coding, the idea that our brain isn't just reacting to the world, it is actively hallucinating what is going to happen next. Explain how this mechanism works.
Well, for centuries, the classical view of the brain was that it operated bottom up. Information came in through your eyes, ears, and skin. The signal traveled up to the brain processed it, and then told you what was happening.
It was viewed as a passive receiver, like a camera.
Right. But modern neuroscience shows us that the brain actually operates top-down. It does not wait for information.
It does.
No. Instead, based on the massive database of every experience you have ever had, your brain is constantly, continuously generating a highly detailed micro-simulation of the world milliseconds into the future.
Give me a tangible example of that micro-simulation.
Okay, when you reach out to grab a door handle, your brain doesn't wait for your hand to touch the metal to process the sensation.
Right.
Before your fingers even make contact, your brain has already predicted the temperature of the metal, the weight of the door, and the precise amount of force your muscles will need to pull it open.
Wow.
It generates that prediction, and then it uses the actual sensory input from your hand strictly to verify the prediction.
So it's essentially saying, hey, I expect the door to weigh 10 pounds, and when I pull it, the sensory nerves just report back, confirmed it weighs 10 pounds.
Exactly. And when the prediction matches reality, the brain is thrilled.
Because it got it right.
Yes. It means the internal model of the world is accurate, the environment stable, known, and therefore safe. The brain can relax and run on low power.
But think about what happens if you go to open a heavy-looking oak door, and it turns out to be made of hollow, lightweight plastic.
Oh, right.
You stumble backward, you use way too much force and nearly pull the door off the hinges. And for a split second, you feel intensely disoriented.
That physical stumble and that flash of disorientation is what neuroscientists call a prediction error.
A prediction error.
Yeah. Reality failed to match the simulation, and the brain absolutely loathes prediction errors.
Why does it hate them so much?
A prediction error means the environment is unpredictable. In nature, the unpredictable is what kills you.
Right.
When a prediction is wrong, the brain has to hit the metabolic panic button. It floods the system with attention, spikes your arousal, and forces the prefrontal cortex to burn a massive amount of glucose to figure out why the model was wrong and update it.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Let's map this predictive coding mechanism onto complex human behavior. If the brain loves correct predictions because they imply safety and save energy, and it hates prediction errors because they burn energy and imply danger,
Yes.
does this explain why people stay in terrible situations? Why do we repeat destructive habits or stay in toxic relationships or keep returning to jobs we hate? Are you telling me the brain prefers a bad situation just because it accurately predicted it?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, yes. That is exactly what the science suggests. The brain calculates the entropy or the uncertainty of a situation.
Okay.
High entropy requires high energy to manage. Low entropy requires low energy. Familiarity, even if it is painful, is low entropy. It is highly predictable.
So predictable misery is literally less metabolically expensive than unpredictable joy.
That is a harsh but accurate summary. Let's say you have a deeply ingrained habit of coming home from work, feeling completely overwhelmed by stress, and immediately drinking a bottle of wine.
Yeah.
Your brain's predictive model has mapped that entire sequence flawlessly. It predicts the stress trigger, it predicts the action of opening the bottle, it predicts the exact chemical cascade of the alcohol hitting your bloodstream, and it predicts the percent severity of the hangover the next morning.
The prediction error is zero.
Exactly.
The simulation matched reality perfectly. The system is perfectly stable even though the host organism, me, is destroying its liver.
Your liver isn't the brain's immediate concern. The brain's concern is the stability of the model. Now imagine you come home feeling that exact same overwhelming stress and you decide, tonight, I'm not drinking. Tonight, I'm going to try doing breath work and journaling.
The brain has no data for that.
None. The simulation goes blank. The brain has no idea what's going to happen next. Will the breath work relieve the stress? Will it make the anxiety worse? Will you feel ridiculous? The uncertainty skyrockets.
So it panics?
Yes. The potential for a prediction error is massive. The brain interprets this high-entropy unknown as a severe threat, and it reacts by generating intense anxiety. It will actively demand that you go back to the wine, not just for the chemical dependency, but because the wine is a known variable. The brain prioritizes predictable safety over unpredictable growth.
This is a profound shift in how we understand our own resistance. We view our failure to change as a lack of courage, but really it's our brain trying to minimize prediction errors.
It really changes everything.
So we've established this intense biological battlefield. The brain wants to save energy via the basal ganglia. It wants to use heavily myelinated pathways because they are faster, and it fiercely defends predictable patterns to avoid the metabolic cost of a prediction error.
Right.
What happens in the literal physiological moment you try to break the cycle? It's Tuesday morning, the alarm goes off, off and you were trying to force a new behavior against all of this biology. What is happening in the tissue?
This is the core insight of the source text, which it terms neural friction.
Neural friction, okay.
When you attempt to change a habit, you are not just having a philosophical debate with yourself. You are experiencing a literal physical clash between two distinct neural networks competing for control of your motor output at the exact same time.
Let's break down the competitors in this tug of war. On one side, you have the conscious intention. This is the prefrontal cortex.
Right.
It has logically determined that waking up at 5 a.m. to go for a run is essential for long-term cardiovascular health.
It is the visionary part of the brain, but it is slow, and its electrical signals are relatively weak compared to entrenched habits.
And pulling forcefully in the opposite direction is the basal ganglia.
Exactly. It houses the heavily myelinated, highly optimized, zero prediction error pathway that dictates when the alarm rings, we hit snooze, pull the blanket up, and conserve heat and energy for another 45 minutes.
And we all know the precise internal monologue that accompanies this clash. The text lists it perfectly. You are lying in the dark, and your brain starts negotiating with you.
We've all been there.
Just skip it today. You had a hard week. Your body needs the rest. You can start the new routine on Monday. Monday is a better day to start anyway. One more day won't matter.
And society has completely conditioned us to mislabel that internal negotiation. We call it laziness.
We call it weakness.
Right. We say we lack grit or discipline. But the text is begging us to strip away that moral judgment and look at the physics. It is neural friction.
Explain that term. Why friction?
Friction is a fundamental physical law. It is the resistance encountered when one surface moves over another. In neurobiology, you are trying to force a weak, unmyelinated electrical signal from the prefrontal cortex down a brand new pathway.
Okay.
While simultaneously, the basal ganglia is firing a massive, high-speed, heavily insulated electrical signal down the old pathway, trying to execute the default motor command.
So they're colliding.
Yes. These two networks are biologically inhibiting each other. The feeling of heavy reluctance, that agonizing mental weight, is the psychological translation of literal biological friction occurring in your neural circuitry.
This raises a really interesting point about self-compassion. If I truly internalize that the resistance I feel isn't a character flaw, but rather a predictable mechanical output of my brain's architecture,
Right.
it removes the shame. When I feel that intense desire to skip the workout, it isn't a sign that I am a failure who can't commit. It is simply the physical sensation of the old neural pathway firing. It's the system working exactly as it was designed to work.
This raises an important question. If we expect the process of change to feel smooth, empowering, and deeply aligned right from day one, we are fundamentally misunderstanding the machine we are operating.
Wow. Yes.
Friction isn't a sign that you are doing something wrong. Friction is the biological guarantee that you are actually attempting to forge a new pathway. If there is no friction, you are just running an old script.
But wait, if it's just a mechanical issue of energy conservation in myelin, why does it feel so deeply personal?
That's a great question.
Because we all know that bad habits aren't just cold robotic routines. They are incredibly sticky. I can logically understand neural friction, but when I am stressed, my bad habits feel like the only thing keeping me afloat.
Yeah.
This leads us to the element that makes breaking these patterns so agonizing. We aren't just fighting myelin, we are fighting the emotional glue.
We really are. We cannot talk about human behavior purely in terms of cold mechanics. The brain is not just a calculator, it is a highly sensitive survival engine. Habits are deeply emotional because we do not form them in a vacuum. We form them in response to our environment, our stress, and our psychological needs.
Let's talk about how an old path in the grass gets paved so quickly in the first place. It's not just about repetition.
No, repetition is only half the formula. The other half is the neurochemical reward. Let's bring in a crucial structure called the amygdala, which is the brain's threat detection center and the brain's dopamine system. If an old behavior, no matter how destructive it is in the long term, ever successfully reduced your stress, mitigated a threat, or produced a spike of relief in the short term,
Right.
the amygdala and the reward circuitry remember that vividly.
Let's trace the mechanics of this with a highly relatable example. Say you are at work. You open your inbox and you see an email from a difficult client that requires a complex, highly confrontational response.
Ugh, the worst.
Your prefrontal cortex recognizes the complexity, and your amygdala detects the social threat. You feel an immediate spike of anxiety, a visceral sense of overwhelm. Your heart rate might even elevate slightly.
Your brain is registering a high-entropy, high-stress state. It needs relief.
And instantly, almost without conscious thought, your hand moves to your phone, you open a social media app, or maybe you open an online store and start looking at shoes. What is happening chemically in that exact second?
Well, the moment you engage in that novel distraction, you get a microhit of dopamine. Now, dopamine is often misunderstood as just the pleasure chemical.
Right, that's what everyone calls it.
But it is actually a learning signal.
Yeah.
It is the brain's way of marking a behavior as functionally useful for survival. In that moment, the doom scrolling or the online shopping effectively pauses the acute anxiety of the work email.
It distracts you.
The discomfort is mitigated. Your nervous system logs a massive success.
It says, hey, we were under severe threat from the inbox, we executed the phone scrolling protocol, and the threat feeling vanished.
Exactly. The brain effectively pours neurochemical concrete over that specific neural pathway. It emotionally reinforces it.
Wow.
The dopamine tells the basal ganglia, whatever you just did, remember it and do it faster next time.
Yeah.
The habit becomes bound by emotional glue. It is no longer just a behavior. It is a designated coping mechanism.
So let me ask the obvious question. If I later sit down and logically, consciously realize that scrolling on my phone for an hour doesn't actually solve the client problem.
Right.
In fact, it makes the impending deadline worse and increases my overall chronic anxiety. Why doesn't my brain listen to reason? Why doesn't the logic of the prefrontal cortex easily override the flawed logic of the habit?
Because the emotional memory of relief is vastly more powerful and evolutionarily older than your ability to rationalize.
Older.
Yes, logic lives in the prefrontal cortex. It requires immense energy to maintain. But the emotional memory, the conditioned stress response, lives deep in the limbic system, which operates incredibly fast and with brutal efficiency.
I see.
Logic alone rarely breaks habits because your nervous system has already learned through repeated physical, chemical experience that the old behavior successfully mitigates acute stress right now.
The brain is heavily discounting the future. It doesn't care about the deadline tomorrow. It cares about stopping the anxiety spike in the next 5 seconds.
Yes, when you try to change a habit that is emotionally glued, you aren't just fighting a physical habit of where your fingers move. You're directly competing with an emotional memory of survival.
That sounds exhausting.
It is. You are fighting a biological system that deeply believes this bad habit is the only armor keeping you safe from psychological pain.
Right.
If you try to rip that armor away without replacing it, the amygdala will trigger a full-blown panic response.
Okay, I have to be honest, we are deep into this, and everything we have unpacked so far sounds incredibly bleak.
I know it does.
We have a brain that is desperate to hoard metabolic energy. It is terrified of the unpredictable and will actively hallucinate reality to keep us in familiar misery.
Yep.
It physically wires itself with myelin to resist change, creating literal friction when we try to do something new, and it is emotionally addicted to its own toxic coping mechanisms via dopamine. It sounds like we are entirely trapped inside a biological prison of our own making.
It does sound insurmountable when you lay out all the defensive mechanisms. But the source material holds a very powerful, highly optimistic twist.
Okay, good. We need some good news here.
All of this architecture, the myelin, the predictions, the dopamine, it isn't a prison. It is just a machine. And the exact same biological rules that built the prison are the rules we use to dismantle it.
So what does this all mean? How do we actually use this understanding of neuroscience to win the tug of war? If the entire system is rigged to defend the old behavior, how does a new behavior ever become a permanent habit?
We return to where we started, neuroplasticity. The paradox resolves itself. The exact same plasticity that is fiercely, aggressively resisting you on day 3 of your new routine is the exact and only mechanism that makes long-term transformation possible.
The strategy isn't to fight the system.
No, the strategy is to outlast the system's defenses.
Let's break down the mechanics of retraining the system. I wake up, the alarm goes off, and I feel the neural friction. My brain is screaming at me to stay in bed. What is the precise move?
The first move is cognitive reappraisal.
Cognitive reappraisal.
Because you now understand the biology, you don't have to engage with the narrative. When the voice in your head says, "You're too tired, just start tomorrow," you don't have to argue with it or feel guilty.
Because it's just biology.
Exactly. You simply acknowledge it and say, that isn't truth. That is just the basal ganglia trying to conserve glucose. That is just neural friction. You expect the discomfort. And then you force the action. You put your feet on the floor and you walk the unmyelinated path through the tall grass.
Even though it feels awful. Even though it is slow and metabolically expensive.
Especially because it feels awful.
Yeah.
The physical sensation of effort is the signal to the brain that the environment is changing.
Yep.
If you force the new behavior day after day, despite the overwhelming friction, you force the brain into a state of biological adaptation. It has no choice.
The brain eventually realizes, okay, apparently we are walking this new path every single day now. It is incredibly inefficient to keep hacking through the tall grass. We need to optimize this.
Exactly. The brain's obsession with efficiency finally works in your favor. It begins to shift its biological resources.
Oh, so?
It starts a process called synaptic preening, where it slowly weakens the connections of the old habit. The grass on the old path starts to grow back.
Oh, nice.
Simultaneously, it deploys the oligodendrocytes to start wrapping the new neural pathway in myelin. It physically strengthens the new connections.
The machete work gets a little easier every day because the trail is getting tacked down.
And as the myelin thickens, the electrical signal travels faster, the metabolic cost of the new behavior drops.
And the prediction error shrinks.
Because the brain is learning to predict the new routine. The effort required to take the action slowly, imperceptibly, begins to decrease.
And then what happens? What is the endpoint of this rewiring process?
The text highlights a beautiful, almost magical turning point. If you persist through the friction long enough, and the timeline varies depending on the complexity of the habit, it could be weeks or months. One day, you wake up, the alarm goes off, and something entirely different happens. The new behavior, the early morning run that required agonizing conscious discipline for 60 days, simply executes.
The resistance just vanishes. The heavy, dragging feeling in your skull is gone. You just put your shoes on without thinking.
Gone. Why? Because the structural rewiring is complete. Your brain has finally updated its internal biological map.
Wow.
It has recognized the new route as the lowest entropy, most efficient path. The prefrontal cortex hands the behavior over to the basal ganglia.
The new behavior officially becomes the low-power background app.
Precisely. The system that fought you with every ounce of its biological might is now fighting for you.
That is brilliant.
If you try to skip your run now and stay in bed, the brain will actually generate friction against staying in bed, because the run is now the predicted, safe, heavily myelinated, established pattern. A deviation from the run would cause a prediction error.
That is absolutely incredible. It completely flips the script. The brain is an efficiency engine, and you just have to patiently feed it the new data until it accepts the new reality.
It really is.
To summarize the core thesis of this deep dive, your brain is not your enemy. It is not malicious. It is not constantly judging your worth. It is simply a highly complex, beautifully efficient piece of biological machinery designed to preserve what already works to keep you alive. It defends the status quo because the status quo is safe.
When you truly internalize that, it completely changes your relationship with yourself.
Right.
You stop seeing your failures as evidence of a flawed character.
Yeah.
You stop identifying as a lazy person.
Right.
Instead, you start seeing yourself as the operator of this intricate machinery. You just have to learn how to program it, and you have to respect the physical laws like friction and energy conservation that govern how it writes its code.
Which brings us to our final paradigm shift to close out this deep dive. We started by talking about the guilt, the shame, and the massive frustration of failing to change our lives. But this deep dive into the source material leaves us with a profoundly empowering reframe. True change is not a brutal moral battle of willpower. Willpower is just the temporary energy you use to overcome the initial friction.
Exactly.
Real change is a fascinating mechanical process of retraining the biological system itself. It is structural engineering, not ethics.
It is about persistent, gradual rewiring. It is about trusting the biology, knowing that if you keep walking the path, the myelin will eventually follow.
Exactly. So we want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to carry with you this week as you go about your life. The next time you set out to change a habit and you hit that inevitable, intense wall of heavy resistance.
Right.
The next time you feel that magnetic, almost gravitational pull to repeat an old destructive routine to soothe your stress. How might to change your reaction in that exact moment to realize you aren't failing? What would it feel like to know you were just experiencing the physical reality of neural friction? What would happen if you stopped fighting your brain, stopped judging yourself for the struggle, and simply took a breath, acknowledged the friction, and started walking a new path in the grass?
Just take the first step, knowing that the friction itself is the biological proof that the old destructive path is finally losing its power.
Stay curious, be kind to your biology, and keep exploring. Thank you for joining us in the studio.